So, magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Today's lesson is all about the adjusting entries. Since lahat kayo, ito yung sinabi na medyo nahihirapan or naguguluhan pa kayo. So, ang gagawin natin ngayon is recap. Since na-discuss na ito sa inyo, at syempre may mga theory questions and practice problems later on. When it comes to the adjusting entries, there are two things that you should remember, the accrual and the cash basis. Kapag sinabi nating accrual basis, nagawa na or nangyari na pero hindi pa bayad o nakokolekta ang bayad. Accrual basis is to record revenues as they are earned and expenses as they are incurred. So may dalawang klase ng accrual. Accrued revenue and accrued expense. So later on, matatakal din natin yan. So cash basis, when we say cash basis, obviously magre-record lang ang accountant ng transaction kung may na-receive ng cash or bayad na. Every entity, iba-iba ang accounting period na ginagamit, depende sa gusto nila or kung ano yung suitable for the business. So may tatlo, fiscal, calendar, and natural business year. Usually, yung fiscal at calendar yung lagi nating na-encounter sa mga problem. When we say fiscal year, it is any 12 consecutive months. For example, nag-start April 1, 2021. Mag-e-end ng March 31, 2022. Yung calendar naman, annual period ending December 31. So the periodicity concept ensures that accounting information is reported at regular intervals. So next is recognition and the recognition. To make it simple, magre-recognize lang tayo kung na-meet yung definition ng asset, liability, equity, income, or expense. While nagde-recognize tayo kung hindi na na-meet yung definition ng asset at liab. Usually kasi asset and liab lang yung dinede-recognize. So question, kailan tayo nagde-recognize ng asset? Kung ang entity ay wala ng control sa lahat or part ng recognized asset. Sa liability naman, kapag wala ng present obligation yung entity. So, the need for adjustment. So, question, why do we need to record for the adjustment? It is needed to ensure that the recognition and the recognition principles are followed, and by the end of the period, dun natin makikita sa FS yung mga naging epekto ng mga adjustment. Without adjusting entries, financial statements may not fairly show the solvency of the entity in the balance sheet and the profitability in the income statement. So what is solvency? It is a long-term financial stability of a company and to cover its long-term obligations. So next naman tayo, which is yung deferrals and accruals. So dito sa deferral, may dalawang kailangan tandaan. Deferred expense and deferred revenue. When we say deferred expense, it is paid but not yet incurred. While deferred revenue, it is collected but not yet earned. Then yung accrued expense naman, kabaliktaran lang ng deferred expense. incurred but not yet paid. Then yung accrued revenue naman, kabaliktaran lang din ng deferred revenue. Earned but not yet collected. So yun yung dalawa, yung sa deferral and sa accrual. Lagi niyong tatandaan na deferred expense and accrued expense, magkabaliktad lang yan. Then yung deferred revenue and accrued revenue, ganun din, magkabaliktad lang. So that's it. Next presenter naman tayo.
So next is adjustment for deferrals. Basta ang tatandaan lang natin palagi dito sa deferrals, may involve na money pero di pa nai-incurred or unearned pa yung service. Next. So allocating assets to expenses. So meaning lang nito is every end of accounting period, yung mga estimated amounts of prepaid assets natin na na-incur or nagamit na is i-record natin to expense. Next is prepaid expenses. So these are expenditures that are paid in advance. Ito yung mga binabayaran natin in advance for future benefits. Examples are supplies, rent, and insurances. Note that prepaid expenses are assets and not expenses. So prepayment of these expenses may initially be recorded either asset method or expense method. So under asset method, cash disbursement for items of expenses are initially debited to an asset account. At the end of the period, the incurred portion o yung mga nagamit na nating portion is recognized as expense while the unused portion remains as asset. Next is expense method. Under this method, cash disbursement for items of expenses are initially debited to an expense account. At the end of the period, the unused portion o yung mga hindi pa natin nagagamit is recognized as an asset while the incurred portion remains as an expense. Dito naman, sabi nga natin kanina, prepaid expenses are assets and not expenses. So habang di pa natin nagagamit yung prepaid assets, makikita natin to sa balance sheets kasi recorded siya as asset. So as we use it, pag na-incur na natin siya, tsaka lang natin siya i-record as expense. Next, prepaid rent. So prepaid rent is a current asset account that reports the amount of future rent expense that was paid in advance of the rental period. So we have an illustration here. On May 1, Weddings R Us paid $8,000 for 2 months rent in advance. This expenditure resulted to an asset consisting of the right to occupy the office for 2 months. A portion of the asset expires and becomes an expense by each day. By May 31, one half of the asset has expired and should be treated as an expense. Sabi dito, nagbayad siya ng rent in advance for 2 months. And by March 31, one half of the asset had expired and treated as expense. So, isang buwan lang yung na-incur natin. So, 8,000 multiplied by 1/2. Kasi kalahati lang yung na-incurred natin dun sa 2 months. So, makuha natin is 4,000. Ang magiging entry natin dito is debit to rent expense 4,000 and credit to prepaid rent 4,000. Next, prepaid insurance. Sabi naman dito, nag-acquire siya ng 1-year insurance and paid 14,400 premiums and wala siyang sinabing date or incurred. So, i-compute lang natin dito kung magkano yung nagagamit natin per month for the whole year. So, i-divide lang natin yung amount which is 14,400 to 12/12. And we got 1,200. Ayan yung magiging amount expense per month. So, ang magiging entry natin dito is debit to insurance expense na 1,200 and credit to prepaid insurance na 1,200. Next, supplies. So, sabi dito, nung May 8, bumili si Wed R Us ng supplies worth of 18K. And at the accounting period ends, it shows that 15K are still on hand. Excuse me. So, dito, ililess natin kung ilan yung natira na na-purchase natin para makuha yung amount na na-consume natin for the period. So, 18K less 15K. So, we get 3K. 3K yung na-consume nating supplies for the period. So, our entry will be debit to supplies expense 3,000 and credit to supplies 3,000. Ganun lang siya kasimple, guys. So, next is depreciation expense. So tatlo lang yung tatandaan natin dito. Yung cost, salvage value, at useful life. So, alam nyo na siguro kung ano yung tatlo. Yung cost, yun yung amount paid to acquire the property or equipment. Next, yung salvage value, yun yung amount that the asset can probably be sold pagtapos ng useful life niya. And lastly, yung useful life. Ito yung time or period that can make use of the asset. So note na yung useful life is hindi siya exact measurement, estimate lang siya. So next. Same lang dun sa mga nauna. Yung depreciable asset natin is recorded sa balance sheet as assets. And as the asset useful life expires, yung mga expired portion niya is marirecord na sa income statement as expense. So, ito yung formula na dapat nating tandaan. Dito natin madidetermine yung depreciation expense for each period. So, cost less estimated salvage value to get the depreciable cost and to get the depreciation expense. We will divide the estimated useful life to the depreciable cost. Next is contra asset. Alam nyo naman na siguro kung ano yung contra asset. So, it describes as contra because having a credit balance in an asset account is contrary to the normal or expected debit balance. A debit balance in a contra asset account will violate the cost principle. So, the reduction in property, plant, and equipment is recorded in a contra account called accumulated depreciation. So, we have an illustration here. So here, service vehicle was bought on May 4 that has a useful life of 70 years and with a salvage value of 84,000. And office equipment acquired on May 5 that has a useful life of 5 years. So, i-apply lang natin dito yung formula kanina para ma-determine yung depreciation expense. So, sa service vehicle, we will first less the salvage value of 84,000 to the amount acquired and we will divide it to the useful life na 84. Why? Kasi 70 years is equal to 84 months. So we got 4,000 depreciation expense. So we will have an entry of debit to depreciation expense, service vehicle of 4,000 and credit accumulated depreciation 4,000. Nung May 4. Next is office equipment. Same process lang din. I-apply natin yung formula. So, sabi dito, ang amount acquired is 60,000. Wala siyang sinabing salvage value, kaya i-divide na lang natin sa useful life na 60 months. And we got 1,000 pesos. Ang magiging entry natin for May 5 is debit to depreciation expense, office equipment, 1,000, and credit to accumulated depreciation, 1,000. Next is allocating revenues received in advance revenue. So, unearned revenue represents revenue already collected but not yet earned. So, unearned revenue is an example of deferral adjusting entry and appears on the balance sheet under liability. The adjusting entry for unearned revenue will depend upon the original journal entry, whether it was recorded using the liability method or income method. So ano nga ba yung liability method? Under the liability method, a liability account is recorded when the amount is collected. And sa income method naman, the accountant records the entire collection under an income account. So dito, kapag naka-receive tayo ng advance payment, magkakaroon tayo ng obligation to perform that service or deliver goods referred as an unearned revenue, and it will be recorded as liability. And kapag na-provide na natin yung obligation to deliver or earned, marirecord na natin ito as revenue. So we have an illustration here. On May 15, Weddings R Us received 10,000 as an advance payment for referrals made. Assume that by the end of the month, one of the three couples referred has already taken their marriage vows, and as a result, the amount of 4,000 pertaining to the referred event has been realized. So, amount of 4,000 said has been realized. So, ano magiging entry natin? We will debit to unearned referral revenues yung 4K and credit to referral revenues 4K. And that's all. Next na po is yung adjustment for accruals.
Adjustments for accruals. Next. Accrued expenses. An entity often incurs expenses before paying for them. Examples of expenses that are incurred before payment are salaries, interest, and utilities. Sa accrued expenses, yun yung paggamit mo na before ka magbayad. Let's say sa utilities, gamitin natin example is yung sa electricity, di ba? We consume muna before magkaroon ng bills and payment. Next. Accrued salaries. Kapag accrued salaries naman, ang case dito is nauna lang nag-render ng service ang employees mo before mo pa sila mabigyan ng sahod. So, example is, each of the employees' salary rate is 7,800 per month or 300 per day. The expense to be accrued is 1,800 or yung 300 pesos per day times 3 days times the employees. So, example na to is, based naman sa book. Yung 3 days din is beyond the last pay period. So, magiging expense siya for the current month. Or yan yung na-earn na ng employees pero di mo pa nababayaran kaya liability mo siya. So, debit to salaries expense na 1,800 kasi nag-decrease yung equity mo dahil dun sa expense. Since decreases in equity are recorded sa debit. And then, credit to salaries payable 1,800 kasi nag-increase or nagkaroon ka ng liability. Next.
Hello, so, teka lang. Para hindi kayo mawala mga first year, punta kayo ng libro nyo. Ang alam ko parehas naman tayo ng examples din sa libro. Kikita nyo naman dyan yung meron yung date dyan eh. Karga ko naman siguro dito. Meron dyan date. 7. Ayan. Lagyan natin dito yung date niya. Bali yung nandun sa libro. Month of May. Yan, month of May. And then we have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Then Saturday. $31. So, yung nasa libro na information pa niyan, sabi dito, entities pay their employees at regular intervals. Can be weekly, semi-monthly, monthly, ganon. Diba? So, kaya, dito sa ano naman, dito sa problem natin, ang ginawa is weekly payroll. And then, ang payroll, sabi dito, made on Fridays or Saturdays. So kaya weddings are as base salaries every 2 Saturdays. So kaya parang 2 beses siya nagbabayad si Weddings are us sa sabi dito, isang buwan. So kaya valid dito, ito yung unang Saturday, yan siya nagbabayad. Ito yung pangalawa naman na Saturday. Yan. Diyan siya, ito yung day na nagbabayad siya. Ngayon, dahil ito, nabayaran na itong bandang dito, ayan, paid na itong mga to. Pero hindi pa tapos ang May. Kaya, itong part na to, hindi na siya mababayaran sa May. Mababayaran na siya sa June. So, bale, ang nangyari dyan, dito na nangyari yung accrual. Ito na yung accrual natin. Kasi nag-render na ng service yung mga employees mo, pero hindi mo pa sila nabayaran kasi babayaran mo pa sila sa, tuloy natin, no? June 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sa June 10 pa siya babayaran. So kaya valid dun pa yung payment. Kaya ito ay incurred na to. Ngayon sabi dito, the office assistant, ang sabi dito is each of the employees salary rate, ito na yung nandito. Kaya nandyan, is 7-8 per month or 300 per day. So kaya bilangin nyo lang ito. Total, ito lang naman yung hindi nabayaran pa. Huwag nyo isasama to kasi ano to weekends yan. Ito lang tayo sa sa working days. Yan. So kaya, bali talo yan. 300 times 3. Ayan, 300 times 3. Tapos ilang employees daw yun. Sabi dito din, ilan yung employees niya. Dalawa lang daw yung employees dito. Ayan yung nasa given. 2 employees lang. So kaya, okay, so, ayun. Kasi, 3 days na lang yan. 3 days na lang din ang compute natin. Na, ayan, no, ito yung computation niya mismo. Yung rate ng sahod na everyday, 300 pesos. Times yung 3 days na natitira sa month of May. And then, yung 2 employees. So, kaya lalabas is 1.8. Ganun lang. Ganun lang siya. Di bali sa, naman, magdadagdag pa tayo ng mga kanyang examples. Okay. Ate Jillian, pa tuloy na lang.
Accrued interest on May 2, Perez Manalo borrowed 210,000 from Metrobank. She issued a promissory note that carried a 20% interest per annum. Both the interest and principal will be payable in 1 year. The note issued to the bank accrues interest at 20% annually. At the end of May, Perez Manalo owed the bank 3,500 for interest in addition to the 210,000 loan.
Interest is a charge for the use of money over time. Interest expense is matched to a particular period during which the benefit, the use of borrowed money, is received. The interest is a fixed obligation and accrues regardless of the results of the entity's operations. So note nyo na lang na yung principal dito is yung 210,000 na hiniram, and yung 20% interest is payable in 1 year. And ang pag-record nila dito is monthly. Next slide na. Interest rates are expressed at annual rates. So if interest is being calculated for less than a year, the calculation must express time as a portion of a year. Thus, the interest expense incurred on this note during the month is determined by the following formula. The interest is equals to principal times interest times length of time. Yung principal na 210,000 times the interest na 20% times yung length of time, ano yan, 1/12. So, yung length of time yan, bakit siya 1/12? Kasi ang hinanap mo lang naman dyan is yung sa isang buwan or yung current month na co-compute mo out of 12 months. Kaya ang adjusting entry natin is debit to interest expense kasi nag-decrease ang owner's equity mo dahil din sa interest expense, and credit sa interest payable kasi nagkaroon ka ng payable for that month. Next na. Accrued revenues. An entity may provide services during the period that are neither paid for by clients nor billed at the end of the period. So, accrued revenues represents revenue earned by the entity, pero yung payment is hindi mo pa nako-collect or earned but unbilled. And then, any revenue na earned but not recorded calls for an adjusting entry that debits an asset and credits an income account. So, yung application yan is yung example sa next slide. Accrued consulting revenues. Suppose that wedding sir has agreed to arrange a rush but simple civil wedding for a Madin couple on the afternoon of May 31. The entity intended to charge fees of 5,300 for the services which is earned but unbilled. And so, debit to accounts receivable, which is yung increase sa asset and consulting revenues na kasi nag-increase yung owner's equity nyo dahil dun sa income or revenue account. And next slide. Accrual for uncollectible accounts. An expense is recognized for the estimated uncollectible accounts in the current period rather than when specific accounts actually became uncollectible. Uncollectible accounts is a contra account, or let's say for example, nagbigay ka ng service. Syempre may accounts receivable ka dun and may dapat kang i-collect. Pero kasi there are instances na hindi lahat ng receivables na yon is mako-collect mo. So yung portion na hindi mo mako-collect, yun yung uncollectibles mo. And according nga sa sinabi, mas nire-recognize yung estimated na uncollectibles kesa dun sa specific accounts na magiging uncollectibles pa lang. And then yung estimates ng uncollectible accounts, pwedeng based siya sa percentage ng credit sales, percentage ng accounts receivable balance, or yung tinatawag nilang aging of receivables. Next. Assume that an entity made credit sales of 1,100,000 in 2018 and prior experience indicates an expected 1% average uncollectible accounts rate based on credit sales. The contra account allowance for uncollectible accounts has a normal credit balance and is shown in the balance sheet as a deduction from accounts receivable. The allowance account need to be increased by 11,000 because accounts receivable in that amount is doubtful of collection. yung, wait lang, yung amount ng allowance for uncollectible account mo dito is based sa percentage ng credit sales. Debit to uncollectible accounts expense and credit to allowance for uncollectible accounts. Then next slide. Throughout the accounting period, when there is a positive evidence that a specific account is definitely uncollectible, the appropriate amount is written off against contra account. And yung write-off na yun kasi, yan yung pag-alis or i-eliminate mo na yung sure na hindi mo na mako-collect and ibabawas na siya sa receivables. For example, if a 1,500 receivable were considered uncollectible, the amount would be written off as follows: a debit to allowance for uncollectible accounts and credit to accounts receivable. Then next slide. Effects of omitting adjustments. When an accountant failed to include the proper adjusting entries, the resulting financial statements will not accurately reflect the financial position and the performance of the entity. Inaccuracies in one accounting period can cause further inaccuracies in the statements of subsequent periods. So itong effects of omitting adjustments, ano na lang, baka ma-tignan or ma-apply na lang sa mga problems or sa series na sasagutan. So, yun lang.
So, dito naman sa analysis using T accounts. To recapitulate, each adjusting entry affect a balance sheet account, an asset or liability account, and an income statement account, an income or an expense account. Almost every revenue or expense account on the income statement has one or more related account on the statement of financial position. For instance, rent expense is related to prepaid rent, supplies expense to supplies, service revenues to unearned service revenues, and salaries expense to salaries payable. Itong adjusting entry, nakaka-apekto siya sa balance sheet account at income statement account. Hindi pwedeng ang maapektuhan niya lang balance sheet accounts at hindi din pwedeng income statement account lang. Pag nag-adjust ka, laging isang balance sheet account at isang income statement account. Next po. So to illustrate here is an example. Equator established by Gallicano del Mundo at the start of the month reported at month end the following related account and account balances: supplies 36,600 and supplies expense 15,400. So ang sabi, may ending balance tayo na 36,600 at 15,400 na expense. So ang total niyan ay 52,000. Pag mag-adjust tayo, ang magiging entry is debit to supplies expense and credit to supplies na 15,400. Next po. Dito naman, assume instead that the 36,600 ending balance for supplies and the 52,000 cash paid for supplies were given. Using the T account, supplies expense is 15,400. Assuming daw na ang given is yung 52,000 na binili mong supplies. So nakadebit yan, tas ending balance na lang is 36,600. Ibig sabihin, nabawasan daw at the end of the month yung supplies. Meaning, nagamit na siya. So kailangan i-adjust yan. Para i-adjust siya, yung 52,000 less 36,600. So makukuha mo yung 15,400. Ang entry naman pag dito ay same pa din doon sa una. Debit, supplies expense, and credit supplies na 15,400. And next po. And dito naman, to illustrate further, a company reported the month in the following related account and account balances: prepaid insurance and 67,000, insurance expense 12,000, and prepaid insurance beginning 48,000. How much cash was used to pay for insurance this period? So dito, mahalaga dapat na alam mo yung mga normal balance ng account para di ka malilito. Ang technique naman dito is work back. Since given naman yung ibang amount, i-work back lang natin siya. Itutala natin ang nasa credit side, which is 79,000, and since the account yan, dapat balance yang sa debit din. Kaya nilagay na natin na 79,000. Tas para makuha yung amount of cash paid, yung total na 79,000 less the beginning balance equals 31,000. Next. So this is the summary of adjusting entries. May iba't ibang types of adjustment, which is the asset method, expense method, depreciation liability method, income method, accrued expense, at accrued revenues. So since sabi ko nga kanina, both balance sheet and income statement ang affected sa adjusting entries. Here in balance sheet account, before adjustment for prepaid expenses under asset method, asset will be overstated, while in income statement, it is understated. So mag-adjust ka, you have debit expense and credit prepaid expense account. Dito naman sa expense method, in prepaid expense pa rin before adjustment the balance sheet account. And will have an understated asset and overstated expense. So pag i-adjust mo yan, kailangan mag-debit ng prepaid expense at credit to expenses. Now, dito naman sa depreciation, before adjustment, the balance sheet account will have overstated asset and understated expense. So to adjust that, we have to debit expense and credit to contra account, which is yung accumulated depreciation. Dito naman sa unearned revenues, pag sinabing unearned revenues, yun yung binayaran na tayo agad kahit na di pa natin na-perform yung services or nabigay yung goods. So under unearned revenues, in liability method, the balance sheet account before adjustment will have an overstated liability. And understated income in the income statement. So to adjust that, our entry will be debit to unearned revenue and credit to revenues. Dito naman sa income method, dito naman sa income method, before adjustment, the balance sheet account liabilities will be understated and revenues are overstated. So pag i-adjust natin, kabaliktaran lang ng sa liability method. Debit to revenue account and credit to unearned revenues. And dito naman sa accrued expense, pag sinabing accrued expenses, yun yung mga expenses na na-incur natin kahit di pa nababayaran. So before adjustment, balance will have understated liabilities and income statement will also have understated expenses. So to adjust that, our entry will be debit to expense and credit to payable account. And lastly is the accrued revenues. Tulad ng sinabi kanina, itong accrued revenues, ito yung mga goods and services na na-render mo pero di pa nababayaran. So meaning receivables mo yan. So before adjustment, balance sheet account will have understated asset while the income statement account will have understated income. Pag i-adjust na natin, debit to receivables and credit to revenues. Next po. And dito naman sa alternative method of recording deferrals, a prepaid expense is initially recorded in a prepaid asset account. Likewise, revenue received in an advance is initially recorded in the liability account and earned revenues. In the case of a prepaid expense, an adjusting entry is made at the end of the period to transfer the portion of the expired asset to an expense account Similarly, an adjusting entry is made to transfer earned revenues from the liabilities account to an income account. Lahat ng transaksyon na kailangan ng adjustment ay initially recorded. Kumbaga, lahat naman ng transaction ay nire-record. So meaning, bago mo pa ma-adjust yung i-adjust mo, meron na siyang initial record sa ating balance sheet. Next po. On October 1, 2018, Calagos Company acquired a 3 years insurance policy for 36,000 paid in advance. Calagos may record this transaction depending on which of the two accounting policies it follows. The 36,000 payment may initially be recorded either as an asset or an expense. So, nagbayad siya ng 36,000 para sa 3 years insurance policy in advance. So, asset siya. So, ang initial entry natin as asset is debit, prepaid insurance, credit, cash na 36,000. And sa as an expense naman, ang debit natin ay insurance expense and credit cash na 36,000 din. Next po.
Sige, Carmina. Ako na lang magtutuloy dito.
Sige.
Okay, so ayan yung pinagkaiba ng ng asset method and then expense method. Ito yung asset method. Kikita nyo ang ginamit natin na pang initial recognition is prepaid insurance. This is asset. Kung natatandaan nyo kanina sinabi ni Ate Nicole, prepaid expenses are asset. They are not expenses. Ano yung mga prepaid expenses? Yan yung mga prepaid rent, prepaid insurance, prepaid mga advertisement, ganon. So, yun Kasi ang prepaid, di ba, ano yan, parang advance payment yan. Kaya parang ayan, na i-record natin dyan. And then, ngayon naman sa expense method naman, kapag sa expense method, ang gagamitin naman natin is expense na kaagad. Na expense na. Yan ang ginamit natin, insurance expense, imbis na prepaid insurance. Magkaiba itong dalawa. Tandaan yan. Ito, pag sinabing prepaid, asset yan. Ito naman kapag ganyan, expense na yan. Okay, so next natin. Ito yung initial recognition Initial entry lang to. Dito naman tayo sa adjusting entry. Ito na yung adjustment. So at the end of the year, an adjusting entry is needed to establish the proper balances in the prepaid insurance and insurance expense account. So on December 31, 2018, 3 months insurance has been consumed. So kaya tatlong buwan daw. Or insurance expense is equal to 3,000. Paano na-compute? And yung 3,000 na-compute by 36,000 pesos divided by 36 months times 3 months. Bakit 36 months? 36 months kasi magkano yung dito kanina? Diba sabi? Acquired a 3-year insurance policy. Dahil 3-year insurance yan, ilang buwan meron sa 3 taon. Diba? Sa isang taon, 12 months, diba? So kaya times 3 mo lang yun, 36 months meron sa 3 taon. Kaya 36 months ang ginamit dito. Kasi yung 36,000 na yun for 3 years, diba? Oh, ngayon, ang sabi dito, saan na yun? Ito, insurance has been consumed and 3 months insurance has been consumed. Kaya, times 3. Yan, 3 months ang ginamit. So kaya pagko-compute nyo, 36,000 divided by 36 equals 1,000 times 3 equals 3,000. Yan yung lumabas ng sagot. So kaya, prepaid insurance equivalent to 33,000. Yun na yung ending balance niya. Yun yung nag-remain. The appropriate adjustment depends on how the initial transaction was recorded. So kaya yung kanina, di ba, na-record natin siya sa asset method. Kung makikita nyo ganyan, ang naka-debit dito, prepaid insurance. So kaya ito madali lang ito kapag ganyan. Kasi ang gagawin mo, mabawasan mo lang itong prepaid insurance mo. Babawasan mo yan. Para malaman mo kung ilan na lang yung natitira dito. So kaya ayan. So kaya re-record mo, debit insurance expense, tapos ito na yung ibabawas mo, prepaid insurance. So kaya nabawasan na yung balance ng prepaid insurance mo. And naging expense na siya. In-expense mo na siya dito. So kaya, natatandaan nyo, kapag ang asset, ang i-record dito, yung nagamit na, which is 3,000 pesos. Ito na yung nagamit. Doon naman tayo sa expense method. So, sa expense method, kanina, naka-expense na kagad. Naka-expense na siya kagad. Kaya dito, ang gagawin mo, i-record mo yung hindi naman nagamit. Diba? Kung kanina ang ni-record natin, yung nagamit na, dito naman ang i-record mo is hindi nagamit. Diba, nilagay ko naman dito sa PowerPoint. Ayan siya, para di kayo mahalito. Tandaan nyo ito yung nasa baba. Ayan, itong nasa note. Asset is, pag asset method, i-record yung nagamit na. Pag expense method, i-record yung hindi pa nagamit. Diba, makikita nyo, diba? Magkaiba yung amount nila, oh. Ito 33,000. Ito naman 3,000. At ganon. Kasi dito, ito nagamit na to. Ito naman, ito yung hindi pa nagamit. Kaya, nag-debit tayo ng prepaid insurance kasi wala tayong prepaid insurance eh. Aalamin natin kung ilan pa yung dinagamit kaya nag-debit tayo ng 33,000. Diba? So, ganon din dito. Tinanggal mo yung in-expense mo nung initial recognition na 33,000. Kaya, ang magiging balance nila is, ayan, parehas lang ang magiging balance nila. Diba? Tignan mo, December 31 balance nila. Prepaid insurance tas insurance expense, parehas lang dito yung amount. Diba? I-account natin. I-account natin. So kaya, mag-insert tayo dito ng table. Yan siguro. Yan. So, ito yung prepaid insurance. Yung prepaid insurance natin. Kaya ganyan. Yung kanina, meron tayong ni-record na 36,000. Dito nga tayo sa asset method. Meron tayong ni-record na 36,000. So ito yung beginning natin. Beginning balance. Yung 36,000. Ngayon, sa adjusting method naman, adjusting entry, meron tayong debit na 3,000. So kaya, ito yung adjustment na 3,000. Lagay natin sa credit. O, kunin nyo na yung ending balance, which is 36 minus 3,000. So kaya meron tayong ending balance na 33,000. Diba? Tingnan nyo yung kanina dito. Prepaid insurance niya. O, parehas. Ito yung ending balance. 33,000. O, diba? Let's mag-insert pa tayo ng isa dito. Ayan. Ito naman, gawin natin tong insurance expense naman. Ayan, i-record naman natin sa insurance expense. So, asset method, ay doon naman tayo sa expense method. Ayan. Ay, sa asset method muna tayo. O, diba? Madali lang yung dito kapag sa asset method kasi ay nakagad 3,000 na kagad yung insurance expense natin. Kaya automatic yan na kagad yung amount natin. Madali natin nakuha yung insurance expense natin. So, kaya next naman is yung yung sa expense method. Sa expense method kanina, titingnan natin ang ni-record dito is insurance expense. So kaya dito tayo muna. No. Meron tayong 36,000 na insurance. And then dito naman ito yung beginning natin. And then meron tayong adjustment na. And now, dinebit na 33,000. So kaya tinanggal mo na dito yung amount na hindi pa nagagamit. I mean yung i-adjust mo na siya para makuha niyo yung amount na hindi pa nagamit. Kaya 36 minus 33,000 equals 3,000. Diba? Parehas lang din siya sa kanina na amount ng insurance expense sa asset method. Ganun lang kasimple. Tapos ayun na yung prepaid insurance. Dito na kagad siya. Ganun lang. Madali lang yan. So, kaya dito na tayo sa kabila naman. On July 1, 2018, Marasigan Company received a 48,000 pesos check for 2 years. 2 years rent paid. So, 2 years ito. In advance. Okay, in advance yan. On this date, Marasigan may record a credit in that either as unearned rental revenue or rental revenue, depending on its accounting policy. Excuse me. So, kung kanina may asset method tapos expense method, dito naman liability and revenue method or income method, paras lang. So kaya i-record na natin. Initial entry lang muna na tayo. Company received 48,000. So kaya kagad yung amount natin. Meron tayong initial recognition na 48,000. Dahil paid in advance, di meron tayong natanggap na pera, kaya meron tayong debit na cash. Yan, meron tayong debit na cash. And then, dahil liability method siya, ang i-ano natin is unearned rent revenues. Tandaan nyo, kapag unearned liability, baka kasi malito rin kayo dyan. Kasi dyan din ako nalilito dati. Ano yung unearned sun? Anong ano yan? Asset ba yan? Liability? Liability yan. Okay, doon naman tayo sa income method or revenue. So kaya, imbes na balance sheet account, ang ginamit is itong revenue account na rent revenues. Parang nirecord kaagad nila na tawag dito as revenue na. Hindi na nila nirecord na liability na utang. So kaya dun tayo sa next. At the end of the year, an adjusting entry is needed to establish the proper balances in the rent revenue and the rent revenue accounts. So on December 31, 6 month rent, it's been earned. So kaya na-earn na daw yung 6 month rent. Magkano yun? Yung na-earn natin ng 6 month rent. Balikan natin dito. 48,000 divided by ilan yan? 2 years or 24 month. Kaya bali ilan yung renta kada buwan? 2,000 pesos times 6 month na earn na. So kaya ang lalabas is 12,000. Ayan. Yan yung lumabas. Yan yung kapag doon tayo sa liability method. Pero kapag dito tayo sa revenue method, ang kukompute naman natin, ito, unearned revenues equivalent to 36,000. So kaya bali parang ibawas nyo lang itong nakuha nyo dito sa liability method na 12,000 dun sa kabuuan na 48,000 para makuha yung remaining. So kaya bali, ito yung nabayaran na, ibawas nyo lang yung na-earn nyo na talaga. Yung nabayaran na, ibawas yung na-earn nyo na talaga para makuha yung natitirang sisingit, babayaran pa. Ayan, 36,000. The appropriate adjustment depends on how the initial transaction was recorded. So kaya, ayan na yun. Kung kanina, ine-expense natin, ngayon naman, nire-recognize natin as revenue talaga kasi na-earn na. So kaya, sa liability method, yung kaninang liability natin na recognize, tatanggalin na natin yung na-earn na, which is 12,000. So kaya imbis na credit, naging debit siya. Kasi babawasan mo, di ba? Adjustment. I-adjust mo na tong liability account na to. I-adjust mo na siya sa kung ilan na lang yung natira. So kaya, yan. Ito yung binawas ng 12,000. Revenues naman yung na-earn nyo na. And then sa revenue method naman, ang i-record nyo, ang adjustment na mangyayari is parang aalamin nyo kung ilan pa yung natitira. Ilan pa yung natitirang hindi pa na-earn. So kaya ito na yun yung kanina, yung 36,000 na yan. Bakit tawag dito? Bakit rent revenues yung naka-debit imbes na unearned rent revenues? Kasi inaalam na natin kung ilan talaga yung na-earn mo. At saka ilan yung natitirang hindi mo pa na-earn. Kaya ilagay din natin dito yung parang kanina natin sinabi. Liability method. And then income method. Ano yung kanina sinabi natin. So dito, liability method, i-record yung na-earn. O, ito yung na-earn natin, 12,000. Tapos dito naman sa income method, i-record yung hindi pa na-earn. Yan. So ito yung hindi pa natin na-earn. 36,000. Ganun lang. Dali lang yun. So kaya ito yung balance nila, parehas lang din. Ito rin nyo na itong T account. So kaya parehas lang din. Parehas ang lalabas. Nasa sa inyo yung kung saan kayo mas madali. Pero kapag mga exam nyo, dapat alam nyo kung ano yung method na ipapagamit sa inyo para di kayo magkamali. Basahin nyo yun para di kayo mawala. Okay, so doon nagtatapos itong yung quick discussion ng adjusting entry. Magpa-practice theories tayo muna ngayon. Tsaka sa mga susunod na mga meeting natin, dito pa rin tayo sa adjusting entry kasi sa survey, dito kayo nahirapan Yun nakita ko. So kaya, start na natin dito sa practice theories. Andito ba si Miss Nicole? Para ako nang dito. So number 1, tignan natin kung andito pa kayo Anong sagot nyo dito, mga first year? Sagot na lang kayo sa chat. Adjusting entries are made kailan? Okay, sino pa? Wala nang sasagot? Chat nyo na lang. Okay, so nagsagot na sila. Total, dalawa lang naman kayo. Ang tamang sagot dyan is at the end of the year. So letter B. B ang sagot dyan. At the end of the year. Hindi kayo mag-adjust ng sa beginning ng year. Kasi doon lang tayo nag-adjust tuwing end, di ba? Kung napapansin niyo yung mga kaninang example natin, puro end yun. End of the year. O minsan end of the month, mga ganun. Pero mostly end of the year yan. So kaya, next naman, kanino to? Yeah, deferred expense should be recorded when? Pakichat na lang din yung sagot ninyo. Okay, so tama yung sagot ninyo. Letter D. Cash is paid before an expense has been incurred. So kaya madali lang yan. Para hindi kayo malito, no? Para hindi kayo malito, pag sinabing accrued, hindi pa nabayaran. Incurred but not yet paid. Pero dito naman sa pag sinabing deferral, paid na siya. Pero hindi pa na-incur. Ganun yun. Madali lang yan. And then next. Yan. An accrued expense should be recorded as? Okay. Type nyo na lang yung answer nyo. Okay, how about the other one? Pa-answer na lang. Ayun, so, sagot na sila. So, the correct answer is letter D. Tama. So, tama yung sagot ninyo. When an expense is incurred before cash is paid. So, kabaliktaran lang ng deferral. So, next naman. What is the purpose of adjusting entry under the expense method? Yan. Tingnan na natin. Okay, so may sagot na kayo. At magkaiba. So, tingnan natin kung anong tamang sagot. So, to record the unused portion of the asset. So, letter A. A ang tamang sagot. Kaya, balikan natin yung kaninang sinabi ko. Tingnan natin kung tama yung sinabi ko kasi, kanina ko lang din nakita. Teka. Saan na yun? Record unused portion sa expense method, Ayun, expense method. Ayun, no? I-record yung hindi pa nagamit. Di ba? So, kaya, tama yun. To record the unused portion of the asset. So, next naman, yan. What is the purpose of adjusting entry under the liability method? Ayan naman. How about the other one? Anong sagot mo? Okay, so parehas kayo ng sagot. Tingnan natin kung tama. Yun. Di ba? Dali lang, no? Kaya to record the earned portion of the revenue received in advance. So kaya earn lang, nire-record natin yung earned portion. So kaya, bale, yun lang ang ano natin ngayon. Sa next meeting, tutry naman natin tong practice problems. Sasagutan natin yung practice problems. So, yun lang. Andrea, you may stop recording.